Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, today I'm going to continue this series on how to play Lamentations of the Flame Princess and other old school retro clones with saving throws. And so, this series, as I've said before, is intended mostly for people who have never played OSR retro clones, never played Lamentations of the Flame Princess, not sure what it's about, or, you know, people just never role played, period. But I think most people watching this have. You might even have played these clones and think, well, heck, Ivan's so cool, I'm going to watch his videos. Or maybe you're just used to something like more modern D&D and want to see what the difference is. Okay, anyhow, we're going to get right on to what saving throws are. And so if you don't know, saving throw is, there's an unfortunate situation happening, and you're going to throw dice to save your behind. It's quite literally like a Hail Mary type pass. In this case, you're just rolling a single D20. You want to roll a target number or better in order to escape damage, or maybe only take half damage or what have you. And so, in general, you're going to find on a character's description or whatnot, we'll go with Lamentations of the Flame Princess first, you'll find this little matrix in the description of the character. And there you go. You'll see like 5 categories. The categories they use are paralyzation, poison, breath weapons, devices, and magic. And these categories vary a little bit from game to game, and even the original games they varied, like where they put something. But it's usually 5 categories, and they're all about, they're close to each other. So something like in this game, paralysis would cover pretty much like any kind of holding, immobilization, that sort of thing. Many games will lump in something like polymorphing and any kind of transformation in that same saving category. Next thing, poison would be like any kind of instant KO effects. Hit points are really irrelevant. This will knock you out, knock you unconscious. Whatever, kill you in many cases. A breath weapon is pretty much any area of effect. So it could be, an actual dragon breath. That's where it came from originally. Fireballs, bombs, if you have explosions going on in your game. Anything where it's something's happening in a large area and you're trying to jump out of the way as best you can. Devices, that generally covers things like magic wands and, magic staffs and rings and anything else that's, shooting out some kind of magic something at you. However, it can be any kind of device. It's also a really great save for traps. And so I'm thinking more like the Indiana Jones, scene where somebody steps on a pressure plate or they take the idol off the little podium there or whatever, and next thing you know, darts are flying out of the walls and you're trying to jump out of the way. It's an instant jump out of the way type thing. And magic finally is spells when it comes right down to it. Any kind of spell that's not coming out of a device, but a variety of magical effects and what have you. And so you'll notice, so we'll do our cleric this time, here, as you get higher and higher in level, they get better and better. So the various games, handle a little bit differently in terms of like what the numbers are and what have you. You'll notice too that sometimes there's a jump from level to level. This cleric went from 14, let's see, can I get him in there? Went from 14 to 12. Many people house ruled, and there was even something in a 1983 version of Dragon magazine, the legendary Dragon 80, where Len Licata actually put in a series of like little granular jumps, so people got better by 5% increments. So you can do that in your game if you want to. Other games handle it a little bit differently. They're different than the standard. They're not standard, but nowadays I guess they would be standard. D20 modern D&D sort of saves where they're based on fortitude and reflex and willpower, which would be analogous to constitution, dexterity, and wisdom. And those categories of saving throws, they come from the old games, believe it or not. You'll see indications in there. I think Lamentations of Flame Princess uses one for wisdom against some kind of spell effects. It actually uses one for intelligence as well. But even the old games, I think something like first edition D&D, had dexterity modifiers for jumping out of the way of things like fireballs and jumping out of the way of traps and all that kind of stuff. And constitution modifiers for some kind of poison effects and what have you, especially for dwarves, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I looked at that specifically. But there's modifiers. You can certainly use modifiers in these games if you want to, based on any kind of ability scores. And so some games have it as canon, some games don't. I believe Lamentations has it as some, but you can look in the rules and figure it out. There are a few other ways to do this saving throw progression if you want to, instead of just using those arbitrary different categories. And let's see, Swords and Wizardry and a couple other games have a basic save. Swords and Wizardry has you start at first level you need to roll 15 to save. And then based on your class, you're better at some things. So in Swords and Wizardry, clerics would get a +2 to paralyzation and poison. Magic users would get a +2 to saves versus magic. Thieves would get a +2 to saves versus devices, traps, magic wands, anything where they're jumping out of the way. You figure that's That's their shtick, their reflex. And fighters, they didn't get a plus to anything. They started out at a 14 instead of needing a 15. And I believe in that game, every level they go up by 1. So next thing you know, you only need a 14, then a 13, etc. Something like Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea did it a little bit differently. They also used a single number. I think at first level you start out needing a 16. Every 2 levels it goes up. So at third level you only need a 15, fifth level 14, on and on you go with that one. There they gave fighters a +2 to death and transformation, which is probably it's lumped in with the paralysis type of things. Magic users get a +2 to devices and sorcery. Clerics get a +2 to death and sorcery, death magic. And because this shtick is your god's looking after you if you're a cleric. If you're a magic user, you've got magical mojo. Should have said this before. If you're a thief, you're just good at you've got that uncanny sixth sense supposedly. And if you're a fighter, well, you're just tough. That's your fluffed out version for why you're saving versus these things. If you want to go that way. Some of the games make it clear that's what it is. And thieves get a +2 versus devices and avoidance. Once again, jumping out of the way these traps. There's another really cool house rule, I guess you'd call it, on the net for original D&D. It's Delta's OED page. Yeah, I'll put the link in them below, but you can find it. And actually, my friend Jamie Prentice, Space Phlegm, improved Delta's original thing. So you can look at exactly how they do it. I think it's more of a target 20 where you want to hit a 20, so it's a modifier you add to it. But it's pretty much at the end of the day. You start at, I believe, needing a 16 as a save, and every couple levels you go up. So it's similar to the Swords and Wizardry thing. However, that's your base save. The classes don't have any difference whatsoever, but you get a +4 versus death type things. You get a +3 versus paralysis. You get a +2 versus being turned to stone. +1 versus breath weapon, and no modifier towards spells. It kind of mimics the old feel you would have in the older games, like first edition, in terms of, well, depending on the severity of what's going on, you have a better and better chance. So poison is pretty bad because that'll just kill you instantly, whereas spells, it might not be that bad. Now, if you succeed in a saving throw, a couple things can happen depending on what you're saving against, what the rule is for that. You could just avoid all damage. You could avoid all effects. If somebody's trying to charm you with a spell, okay, you're not charmed. You've jumped out of the way of whatever it is. You've taken no damage. Other things, and this is really common for area of effect type spells, you only take half damage. So maybe you're caught in the middle of an explosion or a fireball. You would have taken 10 hit points of damage. You only take 5. You save for half is usually the way they say it. There's another house rule you can use because a lot of people don't really dig the whole save or die vibe. I mean, the old games could be quite deadly. You hit up, bitten by a poisonous spider or poisonous snake, or hit up something kind of poison, needle trap or whatever, and you saved. Okay, you made it. You lived. You fail to save, you die. Had this happen to me many times. And so you can, if you decide, okay, that's a little bit too draconian, do something where maybe you roll a d6 afterwards, and the higher you roll in the d6, the worse it is. So maybe if you roll, a 1, maybe you get very sick, but if you roll 6, then you croak. So you can kind of mitigate those. And of course, people always hated the old thing where you get touched by an undead like white and you have level drain. You can always use a saving throw for that. Some of my peers will just shout and hopefully they comment and say how terrible that is. I'm a terrible person for considering that, but you can go ahead and save for that. That's fine. One of the things I like about these the older versions of the saves, to be honest with you, is they're a little bit different than the D20 type thing, because in D20, if you don't know, you generally have you've got those 3 categories, will and fortitude and reflex. Generally, depending on what class you are, you're really good at 1 or 2 of them, and so you have a good save progression. And then the other one, you have other 1 or 2, you have a bad save progression. And as you go higher and higher in level, those jump apart quite a bit. So there's these things that you're really, really good at, and versus other things you're just kind of lousy, even though your character has become relatively powerful. In the older games, in which the retro clones, obviously mimic them in many ways, in general, like as you go up and up in levels, you just get really good at saving versus a lot of things. You become, I don't want to say superheroish, but you're a little more larger than life. You start out kind of zero-ish, and over time, you get really good at that. In fact, and I'll end the video here, but this is kind of a subject I looked at a long time ago. You can find my old videos on saves. I'm probably a bit of a jerk in the videos, but did a lot of mathematical analysis. It's kind of interesting because fighters start out terrible, and they are literally the 0 to hero guys. They really don't have very good saves. In the end, they save better than anybody else. They're very good at getting out of the way. Whereas the other classes generally have something that they're already really good at. Clerics had wonderful saves versus poison and death because their god was supposed to be looking out for them. Eventually, the fighter eclipsed them. Thieves were better than wizards at some point versus magic, and, but over time, the wizards won out over that sort of thing. But most of the other classes started out better than fighters, but then they progressed not quite as fast. But each one of them had their own thing that they were really good at, saving versus. I like that kind of mojo, but still, even though you kind of differentiated the classes that way, this is my own opinion here, or my own preference, everybody still got better and better over time, and you didn't get kind of nerfed, for lack of a better word. But that's and I'll tell you what, that's my opinion. You won't break the game if you really like the old or the newer saves from D20. If you decide, and I know people have done this, and say, I want to play basic D&D or Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but I want to use the D20 saves. It's not going to kill anybody. It's okay. So that's how saving throws work. Those are some of the variants of the progressions, and hopefully, may you roll well and save and not die.